Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Creative Zone webinar in collaboration with the Dubai Businesswomen Council as part of our She Leads initiative. Today we have Youssef Hamza. Youssef, thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here.
Youssef is the partner at V7 Group and also a partner of Investors MENA, has advised over 3,000 entrepreneurs assisting in legal matters, strategy, and fundraising. Investors is also the oldest regional business angel network that has advised and raised finance for startups and growing companies for over $30 million, as well as raising finance for acquisitions totaling $150 million. So Youssef is quite an influential figure in the UAE when it comes to his entrepreneurship experience. He has taken many ventures on board as part of the V7 group that he leads and has many years of experience in the SME and entrepreneurship landscape in the UAE. Youssef, it's a real pleasure to have you here with us. Thank you for joining.
Oh, pleasure is mine. It's great to be here.
So maybe to get started, I mean, as the title of this webinar, Legal Clinic for Startups and Entrepreneurs, I understand that you have a few slides to share with us, or maybe if you want, you can start sharing and take us through your presentation, and I'm sure the questions are going to start coming through, and we will take some of the questions as we go along.
Understood. Understood. I'll have to try and figure out how to share screen here. I think that's the one. There we go. Great. So I'm not really going to be paying much attention to, I don't know if you can see what's currently on my screen.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be paying much attention to that in general. I want people to, I'm sure everybody is coming here with some kind of legal qualm issue or otherwise. The legal landscape, unfortunately, here in the region is relatively new. So there's a lot of misinterpretation, misunderstanding, things that can go wrong. So feel free throughout to just start asking questions. I can't currently see them. I'm sure Lorenzo will be reading them as we go, and let's have this as a dialogue. I'm happy to kind of interact with everybody as we go along. I'm just going to run through things that we've typically seen quite often throughout our time. Let's start with fundraising, because that's kind of the key for every single startup at some point, whether it's even if it's friends and family, going all the way through to the VCs at some point, we're going to be there, right? So what they will not tell you more often than not, because VCs are very friendly and investors are very friendly, they don't want to ever create a bad reputation in the market. They will tell you, we love your idea, we're just not ready, you're just not ready. The reality is there's a couple of key factors that they're looking into that you've not actually passed, and they will never tell you. They would never want to insult you by saying, well, actually, your legal documentation is horrible, because that'll go around in the market and people will stop coming to them for funding. So more often than not, lack of correct documentation is a pain. Right. I'm not actually sure what these slides 100% say. I think somebody's written them for me in the background, so I'm going to speak over them. I may not necessarily follow these things. If you have specific questions, feel free to go for it. So to start with, it's all the very, very basics, and we suggest that they're always in line. Number one, don't go to Google and think that we can print out a term sheet and change a couple of terms. The actual proper investors will know that things are wrong. They'll know that, you know, you guys aren't ready yet. You haven't spoken to lawyers, you haven't done your diligence. So first things first, get the right paperwork. The things that they're going to want to see, always, even if you just started your company, even if you're a one-man band or a two-man company, have the following things kind of in terms of governance paperwork. Let me see what they've written down here. Right. Okay. So if you're approaching an investor, not only do you have to show them your regular term sheet. A term sheet is a 1 to 4 page document that will set out the terms of what you are raising in terms of funding amounts, in terms of what kind of powers you're willing to share with them and otherwise. They'll want to see this in the very, very basics. Then, of course, your previous shareholder agreement. Let's start at the very, very beginning. Whatever you do, you need to keep the following documents on hand. You need to draft a shareholders agreement. Even if it's just you and yourself as a one-man company, you need to have your own company charter, something that governs the activity and has governance of the company. More often than not, people fail if they don't have this. If you have a board meeting, now in the beginning, you usually start up a business with your friends, you sit in a coffee shop, have some shisha, that's your board meeting. fine by me. However, we really, really do expect, and whatever I'm investing as well into a lot of companies, I expect to see that they've documented something, because it shows a glimpse into who those people are, what they were discussing, where they went. And if they discussed something in one board meeting, in the following board meeting, did they actually follow through with what they were saying, or did they completely deviate? And we're able to see why. This way, we're able to judge your character. If you don't have board minutes, it looks like something menial. For us, it shows that, and I'll be jumping between speaking from a lawyer to speaking as an investor. So excuse the split personality disorder you'll see here, but from the side of an investor, what we clearly want to see is, who are we investing into, number one. And we don't know that other than the person we've just met across the table who's pitched us the idea. The only other way we get to see it is through the numbers, which can be painted from time to time. What we need to see is the mentality, and that goes back to see the growth and progression of the people. And really the only way to see that is minutes of the meeting. So when we have that, it's extremely important. So record it, put it somewhere, whether you turn up or not, make sure that happens. Let's get into kind of then the second thing is the shareholders agreement. I think we're all familiar with shareholder agreements, hopefully. If not, feel free to ask questions to Lorenzo, I'll answer. It is basically the governing document between every single shareholder. Now, lawyers will scare you and say you need to future-proof your shareholder agreement. The reality is you do not. That governing document will be completely ripped apart with new investors coming on board. The reason, however, you need to make it look future-proof or pretty or in line with what they like seeing is if they see, again, your mentality is forward-thinking, that the way you've written your documents is in line with the market. That means you guys have done your research and you're diligent. And that's a team I want to invest into. Even if you're a two-man company that started 6 months ago, I want to know you've spent your time doing the work, because that means you're going to do the same thing for my company and my investment. Minutes of the meeting again. So governance is also kind of, when you're small, we don't have time for governance. I know I've set up a lot of startups myself. Lorenzo set up his own businesses. Governance is the last thing you want to think of. Who has time for it? It's not revenue generating, therefore why bother? Governance can come in the form of a simple one-page HR policy, all the way through to large documents and ISO certifications. So don't underestimate even the internal one-page policies that you have in relation to sick leave, in relation to how employees should address people, dress code, simple things. Just makes us know you care enough about the details of those things that you're going to care enough about the details of the larger things. Standardize contracts with suppliers, or standardize your contracts as much as possible, and obviously have a lawyer go through them. We don't like to see 50 different types of contracts for 50 clients. It makes our job more difficult when we're doing due diligence. And strong employee contracts, which I think we're going to go through into here. Lorenzo, if you want to stop in any time, I feel like I'm just running. This is usually,
No, it's very good. And I think that gives us a clear message, and sort of is the first time that I hear it presented in this manner. It feels like getting your documentation in order, having your contracts, your shareholder agreements, your term sheets is something that investors are looking into at the beginning of the relationship, right? You're saying, get all your paperwork in order because this is going to be checked upon you pitching investors and looking for partners, right?
Correct. You're asking me to part with my hard-earned money. I want to see that you've done the work to show me that you can actually look after this money and make it grow. Yeah. So always remember it. There's only one thing that investors kind of consider. It's always, everything boils down to risk mitigation from start to finish. Why do I want to see a strong board composition? Risk mitigation. I know if I have somebody with 20 years of experience who's on your board, he's going to advise you. It's going to be less risky. Every single decision. Why do I need all these shareholder agreements? Why do I need the paperwork? It's everything is about, I'm going to put my money here. What's going to minimize the risk? Because in the end of the day, SMEs are a big risk. There's a high chance of failure around the world, roughly 60%, probably even higher in some places. So all we're thinking is, checklist. Even down to the point where if your investor at some point says, so how are the wife and the kids? Remember, at times in the back of their mind, they're only asking this to say, right, if someone's really sick or in trouble, I'm going to lose my CEO for a couple of weeks. What do I do to mitigate that disaster? So kind of every thought process that goes through is mitigation, mitigation, mitigation. If you have 50 supplier contracts, something goes wrong, we have a problem. because now we've got to go and see different terms and re-review it and get a different law firm for each contract with each supplier. Everything's about risk mitigation. If you have that in the back of your mind, and if you look at pitching an investment from the other side of the table, say, what if I was there and the only money I had in my pocket was $1 million dirhams and I'm choosing to put it into this company, how would you think about it? You'd say, well, no chance. You'd see a small red flag and you'd kindly smile and say, thank you very much for pitching. It's not interesting for us. These are the tiny red flags that start to build up. You come in with a Google printed term sheet, which looks stupid. We're going to say, you couldn't even be bothered to spend the time. I'm spending the time, and I've spent the time to generate the wealth to invest. And I've also spending a lot of time speaking to you out of the day. Typically, the schedule of some investors are extremely busy. They're taking time out of the day to discuss with you, to get to meet you, know you, and you haven't taken the time to do more than a Google search for a term sheet. It doesn't add up, which they'll never say to your face. So bear that in mind.
Yeah. Let me bring a quick couple of questions that I see coming in before we jump into Employees 101. I'm sure it's going to get exciting now. There's a few good questions that says, for example, Angela is asking, is their shareholding agreement the same as a MOU or MOA?
Good question. No, it is not. So the MOU or MOA is your basic standard UAE sanctioned shareholder agreement per se, which is a necessary document for you to have to set up a company. And this is something that, of course, Creative Zone excels in, and they will guide you through the best way to do it. However, everyone's hands are tied on this document. It was drafted in 30-ish years ago and hasn't changed with the times. So therefore, that document is stuck to certain parameters, which ties the hands of lawyers, of the courts, of the notary, of the DED, is that if you wish to put in new terms that have been developed over the last 30 years and new points of law that are very important to the functioning of your company that should be in your shareholders agreement, you cannot add it in. So when you hear Creative Zone saying, guys, we can't change it too much, it's not down to them. It's the government laws that are forcing them to have these articles of association, the MOU, etc. They're not really very, very strong. This is why we always say a supplemental shareholders agreement, which can be notarized and you can have binding. That really is the only thing that an investor or anyone would consider as a real shareholders agreement.
Excellent. Another good question from Reem Al-Mula. She's saying, when buying an existing business, what are the main legal aspects I need to be looking into? And is hiring a lawyer at this stage something I should be considering?
Always, always. Not necessarily hiring an in-house lawyer, but definitely getting a lawyer to help you through this who has experience in these kinds of things is an absolute must. I could probably waste half an hour of Lorenzo's time running through and your time running through what's needed, but let's summarize it in terms of legal diligence. You'll want to know in terms of employees, employee contracts, any kind of outstanding court cases, any loans for which you go to the central bank. You'd want to understand supplier agreements, payables, receivables, how that ties in. There's a large list of due diligence that you should do. Even if the company is only 6 months old, we still say do your due diligence because you never know. We've actually saved a lot of investors a lot of time and heartache where they have a bank account and the audited bank statements only show this bank account and here's what we have, but then they had a secondary bank account attached to the company with a 2 million dirham loan outstanding. So he came in, the other investors disappeared, and they were left holding this 2 million dirham loan, or would have been left holding the 2 million dirham loan had we not found it out. So it's critical, no matter how small the company is, even if it just started 3 months ago, to see what are you really getting into. And also it helps because if you have all these red flags, you will then say, well, we're cutting your valuation down. And also, again, entrepreneurs, be careful. It's a great thing for investors. The more problems we find, the more we say, oh, it's a risk. I've got to reduce your valuation by 5%, 10%.
True.
So as much as it's great for me, it's bad for also the entrepreneurs, me being also an entrepreneur, because you miss that documentation. You make it riskier for the person on the other side of the table. You can't ask for the valuation you're asking for.
Right. Excellent, Yusuf. Perfect. There's a few more coming in. Let's jump on employees one-on-one, and we're going to address some more questions as we go along.
Sure. So everyone asked the question. You have two parts of an employee's compensation. One is the base salary, which is calculated in terms of EOS and many other functions. It's the thing that's critical. And you also have the expenses, the travel expenses, house expenses, etc. So typically what is allowed as a minimum by law would be about a 35% base salary to 65%. I would not suggest this kind of approach. Everyone wants a lower base salary as an entrepreneur because you want less EOS in the end of the day. However, you will actually turn away certain good talent. I've had a lot of talent come to me in interviews and say, what base salary are you paying? We think 50% is fair, 50 to 60% is fair. We say 50%, said great. If it was even a percentage below that, I would have walked out. And thankfully now that person is a really critical part in some of my businesses. So it is very, very important because it's as much as you're saving money, you're also taking from the person who's going to be working for you. So you have to contemplate this. If it goes below 35%, it'll be thrown out by labor court and they'll just apply 100% ratio. If you start going to 80%, 90%, 100%, specifically if the salaries are quite hefty, you're going to end up with massive EOS. And if I see a bill for an operating company of a year, which has racked up EOS of $1 million dirhams, I'm out because the entrepreneur has not done his job. So be careful to balance that really well. And Creative Zone are the perfect people to kind of advise you on this going forward. The best time to test a person is kind of in the interview because they are trying to put on the best version of themselves. And it's very easy, therefore, to trip them up and make them lose guard. Always say things that you would never regularly say in an office environment to see how they react. Always push their limits. Always see the metal of what they're doing and how they've done things. What you want to avoid is the stereotypical employee, the complainer, who will, no matter how well you've treated them, will always go to the labor courts and raise a case because they believe that they are owed more. Even if you've given them percentage of the company and 100,000 dirham a month salary, they want more. You can test this by checking out how long they're willing to work hour-wise. So casually say, by the way, everyone in our company works till about 10 p.m. Is that all right with you? If they go, well, you know, I was thinking 6 o'clock. That's not, if you're running an SME or a startup, you don't want that kind of mentality in the first place. Lorenzo and I know we share WhatsApps until 1, 2 a.m. messaging, talking about the work that we're doing. So you want the mentality and the ideology of that kind of person. And also say, for example, in the workplace, oh, it happens, say somebody gets loud, abusive, swears at you. What's your first reaction? Who are you going to go speak to? And they usually, again, will collect themselves. I would report to my CEO, or I would this. I say, okay, what would you expect then the person to do? Would you need an apology? Would you like, the more they will show, the more you push them into not even hypothetical situations. You can pretend that this happens in your office from time to time. Say, oh, there's been instances where chairs are thrown around. What do you do? And if you see them go, oh, I'm not comfortable with that. Say, well, you know, it's not that chairs are actually physically being thrown around, but you get to see through these hypotheticals how strong they are mentally, how much they're willing to work and suffer for you. And those are the kinds of people you want to make your team, and those are the kinds of people that will help grow your business. So be very careful to watch for how quick these guys are to litigate, to jump to labor courts, to jump to Dubai police, to jump to or to run away. It will save. That mentality can do more than any contract in the world. No matter how strong your employee contract is, if you have a really bad guy and a really bad employee and he really wants to cause you harm and make life difficult, he will.
So which are the most common disputes that you're having to advise startups and entrepreneurs in regards to employees?
It starts the I don't like you dispute, which can come from either side. Typically from the employer. He feels that so disputes we find are they've stolen proprietary information, which actually I will probably add to this conversation somewhere about IP protection. They steal proprietary information and try and make a break for it. They walk away to a competitor, or they start making a lot of noise with your clients, with your staff, with the labor courts to try and force you to pay extra to shut them up. And it happens such that, okay, my EOS is this, but I feel I want it to be calculated at double that rate because I've worked really hard. And what are you going to do? Don't be afraid of these kinds of people. They're simply bullies. Go to a lawyer as soon as you can. They will be able to say, actually, this is the reality through our experience of what will happen. It's only scary the first time somebody starts to jump up and show their teeth. Come the fifth, sixth, seventh time, you just know that these are just bad people who want to take advantage, and legally they can do nothing. So I advise that you speak to a lawyer. Discussions are always best. The first things first, always sit down, always be calm. You are the CEO, you are the entrepreneur, you are responsible, you're the adult in the room. Therefore, you're responsible for making sure that the emotions in the room are calm. So if they start to get angry or a lot of anxiety or pushy, the second you react back, it's over. The lawyers have to get involved post-accident. I'd rather be coming in and helping before you get on the motorcycle and drive towards the wall. Visa considerations. So this is another thing, back to your question, Lorenzo. A lot of things that entrepreneurs try and do, because usually they are warm-hearted and they're running their little family company, including myself at times. Depends which employee you ask. We like to think that we're doing people a favor by extending their visa or by not canceling their visa, letting them look for another job. This is okay if the person is a good person. However, we have 50% of those cases turning around saying, well, actually, you didn't pay me for those months and you owe me now EOS up until such and such a date. Even if they'd only been hired for 9 months, they were on your visa for another 4 months, that triggers EOS. Legally, they're allowed to go to the labor court. Even if you say, well, I left it open, labor court would say, well, that's your fault. Pay him his EOS, nothing to do with him. Oh, and did you pay him the salary? That can be argued by saying, well, he didn't turn up to work. Okay, didn't turn up to work, didn't pay salary, but EOS is EOS. So be careful who you give that extension of the visa to. Labor complaints, again, don't be scared of labor complaints. Everybody receives that SMS on their phone saying a labor case has been filed against you. It means nothing more than turn up, have the discussion with somebody, and go to labor court, which again is not a court that's ever going to get you thrown in jail. It's not a place for you to worry about. It's a place for you to stand in front of a judge and talk about it in front of a third party. It's not something to worry about or to buckle and give under pressure. And Esop plans. Esop plans are fantastic. I recommend Esop plans for every single person who's ever starting or thinking about starting up a business, or even if you're buying into a business, if you're an investor, to make sure that there is a carve out for Esop. What are Esop plans? It's employee share option pool. It basically allows, it's a 5% you set aside, a 10% you set aside of your company shares, which you can then over time grant to your employees. This does three things actually. One is if people know that there's actually an ESOP pool in the company, they will understand the mentality you guys have, that it's much more familial. These guys aren't greedy and trying to break our backs. They want us to be part of the company. It will, secondly, then attract more talent, also at a cheaper rate. So bear in mind that somebody who might come in for a $30,000 a month salary, if you say, okay, 20,000 plus 2% of a company over the next year or two, they'll say, okay, I like that idea. And thirdly, I guess train of thought is gone, but you bind in key staff. So it's Dubai, nothing will stop somebody from leaving and just, here's my notice period and leave. If, however, they have 2, 3, 4, 5, 10% of the company, they're much more likely to stay. It doesn't guarantee they're going to stay. Sometimes there are always things, but it will definitely link them in, which I, as an investor, love to see, that your top management all have ESOP plans. As a result, I know, right, they're not going to run anywhere, or they're less likely to run away. And again, risk mitigation. If they don't run away, the company's doing okay and well. If they run away, it's a risk. But if you have an ESOP plan, it mitigates that risk. And that's kind of where we're going.
I see this is a format that is getting to be used more and more nowadays, especially with startups and entrepreneurs that are starting new ventures. What percentage would you say a successful startup in the moment of launching could set aside as equity to give away to some of the main people that are joining the business at the beginning of the journey?
Okay. It will depend also on the industry that you're in. So tech companies typically go for 5 to 10%, roughly. Now, there will be one for management, and there'll be one for regular employees. Regular employees, usually you set aside 2 to 4% at most. you'll usually give 0.1%, 0.2% to the employees. They're the ones who, again, you want to retain talent. Then the management team, core management team, over a period of 3 to 5 years, typically can see anything from 2 to 10%. Usually the CEO would see about 10% over 2 to 3 years as a CEO. The rest, CFO, etc., probably 2 to 5%.
Interesting.
Or less. Yeah.
Very good.
That's for tech companies. Other companies, again, it depends on. Restaurants usually is a bit lower, as well as manufacturing, construction, usually a bit lower. But then any other normal industry should probably follow close to the tech industry standard. It's really,
And let me throw another quick question in there. There's a good one here. It says, what are the most frequent risks of disputes between partners?
Again, it needs another 30 minutes. I've seen too many. I think if my legal team was here with me, they would love to field this question for me. There's just too many. So number one, let's start with the basics. The biggest dispute is that there is no proper documentation to fall back on, because then it becomes a he said, she said. No, when we started the company, you promised I was going to get this and that. Kill it by having your proper documentation in play. Secondly, make sure things are written down. So when you discuss things, and remember this, it's businesses are dealing with people in the end of the day. It's what runs it. Even in a tech business, if you remove all the people, it's still not going to run. So when you talk about something with your business partner, remember, if the words leave your mouth, you have now actualized them. You've now put that thought and that possibility inside your business partner's head. If you don't put a caveat, if you don't explain that, look, we're just having a chat, it might be 2, it might be 10. If you just throw around the same number, 10, during the entire conversation percent, the next day he's going to call you and say, great, so where's my 10% that we discussed yesterday? You have to be very careful with your words before anything else, with the expectations that are created. So things that we see, usually, easiest one is the direction of the business. They have completely different directions of the business. One wants to go one way, one wants to go the other way. Then usually they'll either fall out and collapse the company, or one will buy out the other, or one will just sit there and wait for an investor to buy them out. Or usually they'll just fight until the company implodes. It's the nice one. You have marriages. So married partners and family friends who work together, sometimes they bring that stuff home with them. And I have to play marriage counselor to quite a few entrepreneurs. And if I don't, the company can collapse. It does interfere with marriage, kids, home life, because all the stress from home, from work, you're now bringing home. And it starts to destroy both sides of the equation. So it's very difficult. We see that. We see greed, which is why I like to lock things down legally. So to remove greed from the equation, we have to remind our business partners again and again that we're all in this together, that we're all moving in the same direction. Remember that things change, mentalities change. So if we agree day one, he's getting 10%, I'm putting all the money, I'm putting in 90%. In a year's time, he's going to want to change that. So if I get offended and say, why? I gave you 10% just for working here, the relationship's over. So make sure you don't say anything you cannot take back. These things are, you're working with a person with a massive ego, typically. So you need to control your own ego and see what's most logical. If they want additional 5%, say, sure, what are you thinking and why and what's your basis, in a very calm manner. The second you go, why? Even if you're willing to give the 5%, relationship's over. I can keep going. Down to money, down to people not feeling appreciated and respected through the relationship. But really, if you notice what I'm saying, majority of it isn't down to the legal problems. Majority of it's down to the relationships between the two people, the expectations, the things that are given between the two. Even if it's a 50-50 relationship, at some point, one of them is going to say, I deserve more. So how do you mitigate that? And again, communication is key. It's like a marriage. Your partners are like in it with you like a marriage. So you have to treat it in that way.
Great.
I will go ahead. General legal pitfalls, I guess. This was back to your question. Trusting in the word. Okay. So somebody says something. You might have known him for 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. Don't smile, accept it, say thank you very much, and then say, let's just get some documentation in there for future investors who want to look at it. Because end of the day, when people fall out of love, they forget what they said yesterday. Okay, this is, you have to kind of move fast. If something bothers you, if something has happened, if an employee has stolen something from you, if things are going wrong, you have to act fast. Not only because it stops things from growing, you know, it's not just a Machiavellian principle, it's actually by UAE law. If somebody has stolen some property from you and you haven't reported it for about a month and you sat on the knowledge, they'll say, well, if it took you a month to come to the police station, it really doesn't mean that much. And now you must be using it for leverage in this labor case, or you want to extort something out of him. We're not going to take it. Whatever happens, whatever goes wrong, kill it and kill it fast. Apply fast. Go to the labor courts the same day. Make sure you have a trail of paperwork as quickly as you can. Paying first, resolving later. I'm not sure what that's in relation to, but yes, we'll move on to the next one. Being too nice. I know it's bad. I know it goes against the principles of what everyone's trying to be. We're all trying to be better, nicer people. However, do remember, as many statements, it's always, don't mistake my smile for weakness. You have to, from time to time, remind the employees, remind your shareholders and partners, without being aggressive, without being a bad person, you have to remind them from time to time that you are tough. You will not tolerate certain things. You don't have to throw your arms around and stomp your feet, but you have to let them know that there are lines to not cross. Because it is human nature that if I have a space in front of me that I can walk into, I will take the step. And then if it opens up further, I'm going to take another step. And even before I know what's happening, I'm walking over somebody. Just because it's human nature. You want to progress, you want to move, you want to see where things go. You don't pay attention to these things. So just because you treat somebody nice, don't expect them to be nice to you. And again, it might be too late by then. I'm not advocating being a bad person here. Right. Specifically when you're dealing with suppliers, a lot of suppliers, or some suppliers nowadays, specifically in COVID times, going, oh, you know, contract's too complicated. You know, why sign? Let's just start the work. Cash down, we'll go. Never do it. Even if you're going to end up losing a client, don't do it. Do not sign up to contracts that are or to clients that are not going to sign a contract with you. If they're not going to sign a contract, they're not serious. If they say it's too complicated, say, well, if you really want our service, what are your problems with it? Now, if you hear a lot of people complaining, fine, change your contract at some point. But if people aren't willing to sign or document or email, it doesn't matter. Lose the cash. It's better than what's going to happen tomorrow, because it will drag you through court. Again, visa extensions. I guess they put nothing else up here. So I'm happy to continue talking about all the different problems or issues that we find, certain case studies. It depends on timing and how much time I've taken of you and how much time I have left. How would you like to have?
Now we can dedicate to a bit Q&A. So to all the attendees, we got 90 people connected. I invite you all to put your questions in the Q&A box. There's Lara saying, yes, please, more case studies. Send in your questions, guys, and we will start addressing them. One question earlier, and also comes to my mind, Youssef, and especially for startups and entrepreneurs, what advice can you give on issues to do with copyrights and patents in the UAE? How do they go about copywriting things and patenting things?
So you just reminded me of a point to cover earlier. Intellectual property in general and things that you create may not necessarily be in the form of copyrights and patents. We recommend that a supplementary contract with all of your employment agreements have IP protection provisions. The reason is they may come up with something there. You may come up with something that becomes critical to your business in the future. And then your business begins to explode because of this secret source, which you've shared with people. There's a high chance they're going to go ahead and try and start something themselves. If you've signed up at the very beginning, where people are in love and discussing and wanting to become part of your business, they're going to be happy to do so. Make sure you get those IP protection provisions in there. It's a one paragraph that you can add into the supplementary part of the labor contract, but really we recommend it should be done, because a lot of the cases that we deal with could be avoided had they just signed that one paragraph, because there's no natural protection for that in the UAE. So in terms of copyright, trademarking, there's not, other than for a brand name, there's not much in terms of law for patents, copyrights protections. There are, I think, 2 patent offices in at least Dubai or the UAE, because it's not done often, because it's very hard. If you have a business, you usually can't afford to set up a trademark. I've been in the situation, many people have been in the situation where you can't afford. So people usually don't do it until they can. When you can, I would suggest do so. If you're in a very competitive market, think about doing it earlier rather than later. But I've had businesses sometimes for 3 years where nothing happens. And I've had businesses for 1 year where the next day they've copy pasted physically the images from my website and just transcribed it onto theirs and changed the name by 1 word. And because I didn't have the trademark, I wasn't able to go and make a case, even though it was a blatant copy, and our license was 2 years earlier than theirs. It didn't matter. It was thrown out of court, and we lost that one. We appealed it. We had to push it. It was a long 1 year process, and eventually we won. But we lost more money than if we had just had a copyright. So they typically cost 15,000 dirhams plus minus, depending on what you're copywriting. But again, aside from a brand name and a logo, it's very hard regionally to copy and or patent something. Usually you'd want to go internationally for patents, which we can discuss in a separate.
Here, actually, on that topic, Narmin is saying, apart from patents, can you protect your ideas, specifically if you're in the creative strategy industry? Can you patent ideas?
Not here. If you're in the UK, I would say yes. There's an idea, there's the ability to. The best you can do is NDAs. Anyone, before you tell them your idea, you can get them under an NDA. And if you can prove that you've sent them that exact idea prior to them setting it up, you can do that. But I'll be honest, successful businesses aren't about the successful idea. It's always about the execution. I have seen, and you've seen it 1,000,001 times historically in Dubai and throughout the world. I've seen guys with $1 million becoming second or first in the market, where you have other multinational billion-dollar giants who are still failing to enter the market. So it's really down to you. I would not worry so much about, unless you're talking about genuine trade secrets, which are patentable, such as new solar technology or otherwise. It's an idea is an idea, and if you've had it, likely someone else has had it. So focus on you and focus on how you execute that idea differently to everybody else, and getting to the market first, because then people will associate you with the product.
Excellent. Well, in this regard, I mean, I can share even a little experience of mine. And back in my media days, I created an event called the Young Global Leaders Summit. And I did this first event very successfully. And I got contacted by the World Economic Forum, who organizes something called the Young Global Leaders Forum, or etc. And it was 2 different brands, something I was doing here locally, but they had registered the world's Young Global Leaders, YAL. And they had me remove all my websites. I couldn't make any reference to anything that related to YGL, etc. So I don't know, maybe I'm trying to bring this up for anybody that has projects and somehow relate to something else that is being done internationally. Somebody may come and knock on your door, right, Yusuf?
Correct. If you have the cash flow to protect at least the brand name, do so. But the only way to protect the idea, what they've probably done, correct me if I'm wrong, Lorenzo, is to patent it, do like a worldwide patent or a worldwide, that's probably what they got you on. Which for a startup, for a young company, you're not going to spend hundreds of thousands to do a worldwide patent on an idea. So
a few more questions coming in. It says, in regards to EOS, does the previous owner pay EOS up to date of ownership, or does the previous years get accumulated onto the new owner?
Good question. That's down to the contract that you sign with the new owner. There are many ways to cut the cake. There's something called debt-free, cash-free. So if you are acquiring a business 100%, he will remove any debt, whether it's a loan, whether it's EOS, whether it's payables to third parties. He'll take that either out of the purchase price or he'll leave that cash in the company. But whatever cash is actually in the bank account, he'll also strip out, minus maybe about 1 month of salaries and payables. So in that cash-free, debt-free model, yes, he is liable to pay all the EOS up to that point, and otherwise. That doesn't happen often other than if you're acquiring. If you come in as a business partner and you're coming in for 10, 20%, you're assuming the same liabilities. Unless you really carve that out from the start, which I'll be honest, would probably be offensive. Say somebody started a business 6 months ago. I then invested 6 months in and said, oh, well, you're building up EOS in the last 6 months. I don't want to touch it. You're no longer partners. You're just coming in as a it's not creating a great relationship. So case by case, it depends what you discuss and what everyone agrees to, but come speak to us for that going forward.
Excellent. There's a good question here from Nawel. It says, are there some key regulations to know of regarding legal protection of customers' data, especially in the e-commerce market? Many of our startups nowadays are into the e-commerce business. They're starting, e-commerce companies. Is there any key regulation that they should know of in terms of legal protection of customers' data?
So yes and no. There is internationally now GDPR, which is mostly a European law that, as you'll see in the news, they start harassing the likes of Google and Facebook for not taking the right steps to protect the data, which is why now on all websites you see a little pop-up saying, would you accept these cookies? Accept, otherwise you can't go ahead. It's really more gimmicky than actual protection. It's a matter, any company can be GDPR compliant very quickly. I would suggest you do it just to cover yourself, but they are not looking for companies that are small, nor do they care. The only data, there's no real necessarily data protection laws. You should obviously, if you are taking on information such as mobile numbers, Emirates IDs, et cetera, you should show adequately that you are protecting it as much as possible. So in case there's a leak, you're able to show in the courts, in case someone tries to open up a case, say, well, I took all the necessary steps here, because there's no government mandated, this is the law, you must host X on a server Y. None of that actually technically exists here. They're very particular though about, as I said, Emirates ID, passport information, credit card information. Just make sure that this is preferably, you take all the necessary steps as well as you can to protect it, but there's legally nothing.
Excellent. Another good question says, what documentations should you have in place legally when you start a partnership?
The only thing I stress again and again is just a shareholders agreement, something to govern the two of you in your relationship. That is the key document. And I'll say it again and again, and it has to be a good one. So I'd say go to your friendly neighborhood lawyer and ask them to draft something for you.
What about financial legal implications that startups need to be aware of at getting started? Financial legal advice that we can give them.
Define financial legal advice.
Well, I'm guessing things pertaining to the financials of the company in case something were to go wrong, lack of payments.
Okay. Whoever asked the question, maybe give a bit more detail into exactly what you're going for. If we're going by because it can span across.
Writing tax, liabilities.
Okay. So legal repercussions, please get a good tax and accounting agent. Creative Zone are fantastic. They actually do our tax and accounting work for us. The last thing you want to be in is that situation. We had somebody who had 200,000 dirhams worth of transactions, but 300,000 dirhams worth of fines because they charge you per transaction. So legal liability, they have a zero tolerance policy in the TRA for any kind of tax difficulties. Now, in terms of liabilities, it's a bit of a gray area. It depends how strong the contract you have is, what the payment terms are. Are you trying to genuinely fix the situation of non-payment? The court will consider a lot of things, but typically you want to avoid the court as long as possible because it will take time and money of everybody and will usually come to the same conclusion. Here's the contract, you haven't paid, pay. Now, if you are chasing funds and the company is bankrupt or doesn't have the funds to pay, despite getting a court order, you're not going to get the cash because they don't have the cash to pay it. In the instance where you are not able to make payments consistently and there's no hope in sight, then you need to consider a form of liquidation, staged liquidation. And for that, I would have to see your specific case to understand what you need to do. But there's 100 ways to do it, none of which are easy or fun. But in the end of the day, you don't want to keep racking up more and more and more payables until the point where you start having criminal cases and civil cases on your head, because that can snowball very quickly and lead people to jail at some point.
Right. Well, we have another 3-4 minutes left for today's session. Yusuf, there's a couple more questions. This one you will know well because of me understanding your background. It says, can free zone companies hire interns? And you know a bit about the intern industry. And tell us why you know this.
Technically, legally? Legally, everything's very gray. So interns, there's no actual law on interns. However, there is a lot of documentation. There's a lot of at least open discussion about people working as interns, and there's a lot of fights towards it. My background is as shareholder of Olive, which is the largest internship network in the Middle East. So we've seen every kind of case. The government is on your side to employ interns. However, a couple of things you should consider. One is in the documentation to them, you should never mention remuneration or the word salary, or it should be none of that, because the second they're a salaried worker, you are in breach. You need to provide them a visa, a labor card, etc. You need to use words such as learning experience. You need to have then, covering expenses only, for example, that a stipend of X thousand should be used to cover simply expenses for food and travel. That way, if you use any word other than stipend, you could get caught out. You just have to run, whatever you think is normal in a labor contract, do the exact opposite. But yes, technically it is legal to have interns. We have interns all the time. There's always interns coming through our business at any point in time. We are very fond of them, and they actually end up becoming some of your best employees. Specifically, you take them straight from university before some other companies have the time to mess them up, and you get to build them up the way you want to. I would definitely say go for it. Yes, and it is legal as long as you do it in the right way.
Excellent. Well, maybe just to get to the end of it, Yusuf, you've invested yourself as part of your group in many startups, and you have also pitched for investors and partners for some of the other companies that you have started. Tell us a little bit more about some of the things that you have started, which ones sort of having the right documents, the legal sort of documentation really is it that make the difference when it comes to pushing these projects successfully?
Oh, because I was the lawyer of the investor, they always forced me to do free legal documentation. So I can't speak too much of my investments that don't have strong legal documentation. They all do. It's a precondition of me joining. But we've invested into quite a lot of companies. Again, Olive for one, MyList, which is Merit, which is now becoming a very big global employee rewards platform, which is working with governments across the world and large organizations. I'd say she's one of my favorite CEO entrepreneurs. Julie Leblanc, she's the mother of 3, and she's managed to take a company from very few employees to now literally across the world with phenomenal revenues and growth potentials. So I would say the relationship in all of the companies between the parties have thankfully at least, and there have been certain instances, not in my list's case, there have been a lot of instances in a lot of the business I run where things hit the fan and major problems could have been caused. But thankfully, due to the great paperwork we had, we managed to pull out of it very, very quickly. And on top of that, actually, all these companies have now found investors of very high caliber. We've had the likes of Aramco's VC arm. We've had the likes of, I mean, all the big VCs have come in and on board, and they all say the same thing. Wow, we love your paperwork. Oh, wow, it's great. It's fantastic to join a company that's, got such clear documentation. Oh, they always say the word is no-brainer. It's not necessarily that the company is always the best in the world, but when they see that level of diligence, we've avoided, I'd say, at least 4 failed investments purely down to the right paperwork being there. I've had my fair share of my partners getting greedy. I've had my fair share of people walking out, key employees just walking off, key investors walking off, people trying to cause trouble, our own investors trying to start up a competing company. Every single one of these things were blocked, and we were able to quickly turn it around as a result of the paperwork. We didn't have to go fight tooth and nail through the courts. We didn't have to do anything. We just got injunctions very quickly. We took over controls very quickly. We cut out the people who were trying to cause damage to the company. It was just, we send one email to the ADGM, the Abu Dhabi Global Market Authority, and say, this has occurred in accordance with the SHA, it's in breach. They get into contact with them, and that'll be it. It would be a very, very quick turnaround. So, and at a young stage, you need the ability to turn around and correct course quickly. Because if your manager walks out and takes all of his powers with him for one day, for example, on bad terms, you're done. What do you lose control of the bank account, you lose control of your internet online access, your banking. They own 50% of the company. They still have the ability to do what they want if they want to. But if you have the provisions in there, next day you just find somebody else and move as if you'll suffer for a bit, but you'll start to get back on your feet instead of collapsing. And I so far in the last 15 years of investing into companies, I failed. One investment has failed, which is my very first investment, of which, again, the paperwork was not great, and the communication was pretty poor between the board and between the CEO. Everything else after that, I learned my lesson and just repeating myself again and again. But these are kinds of the things that we just see are critical. So
I think there is a saying that goes something like, I realized 10 years too late that the right paperwork was not put in place, right?
Yeah. And I always say lawyers are like insurance brokers. You kind of want to have them on board before the accident happens, because afterwards, you're in a lot of trouble. So
everybody out there, you're maybe some of you at the starting of your entrepreneurial journey. I would say today's, learning, it's papers, and papers. Get your papers in order. Get everything from the ground up established properly, because 10 years later, you're going to regret not having done things properly, right, Yusuf?
Sometimes 10 days later, I can tell you.
Yeah, true. All right, so we reached the end of our session today. It's 6 p.m. We're receiving a lot of thank you for the session. Are we going to be sharing the presentation? Yes, we're going to be sharing the presentation. We will send a full link with the entire session if you want to share it around with friends and family. And we will also include Yusuf's team's full details at V7 Group, where you can reach out to them and see where V7 Legal can also advise you if you have more questions or you would like to hire them for putting together your papers and another assistant that you may have. Of course, you know that at Creative Zone, you can reach out to us on anything related to setting up your business, as well as tax and accounting issues and many more. Yusuf, I totally thank you for today. It was a real pleasure doing this. I think there was a lot of value for all the attendees.
Pleasure is mine. If anyone's looking to reach out directly, you can, Lorenzo will be sharing the details. Any companies who are good companies looking for investment, we are always willing to look and listen. So thank you very much, I guess, everyone, for your time. Thank you, Lorenzo, for moderating this and keeping me in check. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Yusuf. Thank you. Thank you to all the attendees. And we will see you soon in the next one next week. Thank you all. Goodbye now.